Hello and welcome to my full guide for the Ninja Creami. So this is everything I've learned in 2 years, all compiled into one video. Whether you have the base version, the swirl, or the deluxe, I'm sure I'll be able to give you some useful tips. Um, so this is a very long video, so in the description there's going to be timestamps. I broke the video down into 11 individual sections, which I'll be talking about shortly. But yeah, so if you want to just skip over a section or you want to skip to a certain section, just check the description. All the timestamps will be left there. Because I wanted to touch on each unique aspect of the machine, and basically just cover everything you'd ever need to know about this machine, and everything that I've learned over the past 2 years. And then also, I've made over 50 different recipes. They're all posted to my channel, but that is kind of complex going through each individual video, and some of the recipes aren't as fine tuned as I'd want them to be. So what I've done is I created a Google Excel sheet where I wrote down every single recipe. I made notes if that's required, and then I also gave it like a quick rating so you know which ones are really good, which ones are just okay, and then which ones are great. And then at the end of the video, one of the sections will also be my favorite pints. So if you just want to get some really good recipes, you can skip to there. Um, but yeah, so that's all. I'm gonna start telling you now about the different parts of this video, and then we'll get right into it. Alright, so let me give you a quick rundown of each section. So part one is before you buy. So I wanted to give you a list of pros, cons, questions for you to ask yourself. If you're on the fence of buying this product, I'll try to help you out. Part two is more of an informative discussion. I'll explain how the machine actually makes ice cream and how each setting works. I'll touch on the settings on both the base and on the swirl. This is really good if you're like overwhelmed by the sheer amount of settings because it can be overwhelming at first. In part three, give you a very basic rundown of how a typical ice cream recipe works. Um, I'll touch more on ice cream and light ice cream than the other settings, but I will comment a little bit on sorbet because I do know a little bit about that one. Next, in part four, we have a step-by-step guide. You come along with me. It starts before you even have a flavor that you want to make, so before an idea even forms, and then it ends when everything's clean and it's perfect for next time. Part five is super quick. It's really just a reminder to clean certain parts of the machine that you might not have known you could clean. Part six is one of those sections I wouldn't skip. I alert you of a bunch of common mistakes and issues I've seen people make. These are some things that are really easy to fix, but I've seen people make them over and over again, these mistakes. So I really don't want you to fall into them. Part seven, I have you become a chef yourself. I bring you along me creating two different recipes, and it's supposed to be helpful. This should be helpful if you're having trouble with like measurements and like deciding how much of everything to use in your own recipes. In part 8, I compiled a bunch of random tips and tricks. So these are just things that I couldn't really fit anywhere else in the video. But in this section, there is a really big tip that it's personally what made me fall in love with the Ninja Creami. So that's a section I wouldn't skip. And finally, we get to talk about my recommendations for you. We start off with my favorite ingredients in part 9. So here I share with you every single ingredient that I love using to flavor my ice cream recipes. In total, there's over 20 ingredients that I mentioned. Of course, there's a ton more, but I'm telling you what works for me, and you're definitely gonna have some new options after this section. Next, we have in part 10 my favorite mix-ins. Honestly, I haven't used as many mix-ins as I probably should. Mix-ins is one of the best parts of the machine, but I honestly haven't used too many. But there are definitely still some good options here. And then finally, in part 11, we have my favorite pints. So in this section, if you don't want to watch anything else in the video, you just want some good recipes, you can watch this section. I'll share with you my favorite recipes. There's going to be a wide range of recipes. I chose some, so everyone should have a recipe in there that they would like. And yeah, so that's it. I'll see you in the first section. Welcome to the before you buy section. So I just want to give like kind of an honest review on it as a product because I mean I do love it, but I understand that it's not for everybody, and I wanted to list some pros, some cons, and then some questions you should probably ask yourself before buying it yourself, just to see if it's the right thing for you. Again, I love it as a product, but I want to be honest and I want you to make the right decision. I don't want you to buy it and then never use it. Okay, so pro number one, it's you get to eat a lot of ice cream. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's probably the first thing you thought of. This machine's so nice. You gotta make like lower calorie options, which means you can have it more frequently, and you just gotta have ice cream every day. Which who's not gonna want to have that? Sometimes you can even have it more than once. I've had like three. I've had days where I've had it like 3 times a day. So it's just who's not gonna want that? So number two, there's lots of flavor possibilities. Because you get to control the variables, like since you're making it at home, you can basically make whatever ice cream you want. I've had times where like I wanted to make a corn ice cream because I was like really into corn. I could do that. I just did canned corn and milk and sweetener, and it tasted good. Tasted like corn. I did an oatmeal one. So if there's like a flavor that you've been wanting, like let's say it's the middle of the summer and you want like a pumpkin pie flavor, boom, you can just make it yourself. So number three, it's easy to get in protein. Ever since I've gotten this, I've never really struggled getting in protein. Before there was times where I was like, oh, like I have to get a big protein meal in. But because of this, you can have like 1 to 2 pints, even if you're not using protein powder or Fairlife and you're just using skim milk like I do. It's still really easy because it's like 13 to 15 grams of protein per pint, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then you have 1, 2 in a day. That's easily 30 grams of protein, and that's like without using any like filtered milks or protein powders or PV Fit or whatever. So yeah, so it makes it really easy to get in your protein goals if you struggle with that. And then another one is there's a lot of variety in recipes. So if you're vegan or you can have lactose or you have like some sort of restriction on your diet, this machine is really adaptable. So you can use like milks like soy, cashew. You can use like Fairlife, which is a lactose-free milk. So yeah, there's a bunch of options in that regard. And then another one is kind of building off that is control over the ingredients. So personally, I'm not like a huge like I don't really go into the ingredients on the label. But there are some people that I know like they don't like eating certain like gums or certain artificial sweeteners. Or maybe they don't want like seed oils or something like that. I personally don't really like care or think too much about this, but in the case of the Ninja Creami, it's perfect because you got to control every single variable, which those are variables. And then I'm gonna put probably a price breakdown on screen here, but it is very affordable. Milk is typically affordable. I mean, it depends on where you're getting milk from, but if you get like skim milk like I do, filter milks can get a little bit more expensive. But if you're buying like a skim or whole or 2% or whatever, it should be relatively affordable. And then the sweeteners can be like more expensive, but it's not too bad. And then xanthan gum and salt, and then usually flavorings are just extracts or syrups, and those can, depending on, it always depends on like where you get it from. But those can typically be affordable as well. Um, and then another one I want to talk about, and this one, I'm not even saying this because I want you to like check out videos on my channel. There's so many great people out there that like post Ninja Creami recipes. Yeah, so you're basically never gonna have like a point where you're like, what do I make? There, there's always like some video out there that you probably have never tried. So I personally have like 50 videos, 50 different like recipes posted on my channel, and then in the description there's obviously gonna be the the collage of different recipes. I'll post each one there so you can check that out. There's a bunch of other creators. Maybe I'll flash a couple on screen. That I personally, when I first got the machine, I tried out their recipes, and that kind of like made me fall in love with it and want to make my own recipes. All right, so our last pro is there's lots of possible ingredient swaps. So, I mean, at the base, it's just milk, and milk is a pretty like wide available thing. But then for the gums and the sweeteners, there's a ton of different options: erythritol, allulose, monk fruit, sucralose, stevia. So if you can't get your hands on one of them, even normal sugar, if you can't get your hands on one of them, there's normally another option like xanthan gum. There's also gum arabic. You can leave it out. Yeah, so it's really flexible. All right, so that's all the pros. Let's move on to the cons. All right, so we're on to the cons. So the first con, you've probably heard it before. The machine's really loud. I think at times it can be like overstated, but I also do live in a house. I don't live in an apartment, so I personally don't have to worry about like other people hearing the machine. Well, I do my family members, but not like other people living around me. So if you do live in an apartment, it is something to consider. I think I've seen online there's like noise blockers that you can put on top of the machine when it runs, just so it's not as loud. So you might want to look into that. But it is loud. It's not like it is loud. I'll be honest, it is pretty loud. And then the next is probably the second most you've heard, that you have to wait 24 hours. So like if you want an ice cream now, you're gonna kind of have to prepare for that in the past. So it sucks if you want like a certain flavor, like you're craving a certain flavor, but you have to wait 24 hours because they do have to be 20 frozen for 24 hours for it to actually like spin into making into ice cream. So that's another con. And then making pints takes time. So this is more of like a beginner thing. When you first get the machine, when I first got the machine, it took me quite a while to like make my pints. But as you get like quicker, like as like you get experience, you'll know like what steps you can do. Maybe you get some shortcuts. So at first, I'll say it takes like per pint maybe 5 to 10 minutes. But as you get quicker, you can make it in under a minute easily. And you can also like make them in larger batches, like in the blender. Um, yeah. So and then the high initial cost. This is probably like my biggest con. Like, there's really nothing you can do about it. If you have to be able to afford it, there's no like I don't know, like there's nothing I can say. Like the machine costs a lot, and then you probably want to buy like 2 or 3 more pints just so you're not like limited to one, so you're not like running out all the time. If you go on like a noise blocker, you have to buy like all these like sweeteners that you probably alternative sweeteners or like gums that you probably don't have in your house. Maybe you do, but so it does have a high initial cost. I'll be honest. That's probably like the the worst part of the machine, like that I'll say. And then another one, like personally, it's not a problem for me, but I do acknowledge that it does take up space. So you can see they are pretty big machines, both of them. This one's bigger. Um, but the actual machine takes up space. You have to make sure you have space in your kitchen. But then also your pints take up space. So you have to have freezer space available for them. But the freezer, they have to freeze straight. So they can't freeze at an angle. So you have to make sure it has like a flat bottom for it to freeze on. And that is kind of a problem. That is like more of a problem that I have. Um, my freezer, like sometimes I won't have space and I'll have to like just do some maneuvers to make it fit. And then the final con is not every flavor works out. This happened a lot more when I was first getting into it. So as you learn more about recipes and like what ingredients work, what doesn't, like what ratios, amounts work, all that, which I will help you in the video, but not every flavor will work. Like you'll think of something in your head and you'll be like, "Oh, this is so nice. I'm so excited to make this." And then you'll try it and it doesn't work. So not every flavor works, but in the long run you should be able to get like a couple down, especially with the help of this video. All right, so let's move on to some questions that you should ask yourself. This is kind of more of a part where I just want you to like think about like yourself as a situation because I I really don't want you to regret buying this if you do buy it. I want you to like love it and use it if you think it's going to be right for you, and then if not, it's not your thing, you know. So the first question is, do I have time? So actually putting all the ingredients together and freezing and then making in the machine, it does take time. You will get quicker, you will get better over time at making them, but still it's going to take time. Do you have time in your weekend? Are you kind of person that you don't really want to work too hard for your food? If that's the case, you know, can I afford it? It is a very, very high um upfront cost, and you should consider that. And then alongside the actual machine, you might want to buy a couple extra pints just so you're not stuck with like one or two, and then you have a point where you have to like make pints every single time you eat one. I do recommend having a couple extra pints. So there's a very high initial cost, and then you include like having to perhaps buy like sweeteners or xanthan gum. Even though those are more affordable, it's still a price that you have to pay. So I'd consider that. And then will I actually use it? Will you use the machine? I don't like this is probably the biggest thing. You don't want it sitting on your shelf just collecting dust. Do you think you're gonna have like the motivation and like the want to use it, or will you just like prefer to eat other things? Um, and then and then kind of building off that, do you actually like ice cream? So I know it sounds kind of crazy to say, but like think, how many times have you had ice cream? Do you like the texture of ice cream? Do you like the consistency? Because it does get repetitive over time. You're kind of just having the same consistency over and over and over and over again. So if you don't like the consistency of ice cream, which like that's fine, it might just not be the thing for you. And then do you have space? So you can see the machines next to me, they are quite large. So you're gonna need counter space for them, and then alongside that, you're also gonna need space for the pints, not only on your counter but also in your freezer. So they need to freeze upright, so you need to have a space in your freezer where they can freeze upright, and preferably be like untouched and just left there for when you need them. So that's another consideration. And then the final question that I want you to ask is, would I rather buy ice cream from the store? So like, if you're getting ice cream 2, 3 times a month, it's probably just worth it to buy it from the store. Like, there's so many great brands out there. There's like low calorie, like normal, regular ice cream. There's so many different flavors out there. Ice cream is one of those markets where there's really like a bunch of options. So if you don't have it that often, then I'd recommend just not buying the machine and just buying from the store whenever you actually want ice cream. Okay, so those are all the questions. Let's move on to the next section. Okay, so hopefully that last section was helpful and helped me decide whether you want to buy Ninja Creami or not. And in this section, I'm going to talk about how it actually makes like the ice cream, like how the machines function, and then I'll probably touch on the differences between the two machines if you're like wondering like which one is better to buy. So how does it actually make ice cream? So first, you freeze your base. It has to be frozen for like 24 hours is like the general guideline, because like you want it to be frozen like fully solid all the way through. So 24 hours is normally what they give, and then it's added to this machine, and a blade extends all the way down throughout your ice cream. And what it will do, first is it's going to break up the like frozen, typically milk. It's gonna break it up into like a fine like dust like powdery thing, and then it'll spin it, and it'll kind of like break, so it breaks into clumps, and then it'll form the clumps together, and then it turns into kind of an ice cream consistency. Of course, there's other settings like you can do with fruit. There's like a sorbet setting, but those function like more or less the same. All right, so I'm going to talk about the different settings. First on the basic, like just base Ninja Creami, and then I'll talk about what the swirl does differently. So the first setting you have, also a little caveat, I do focus on using ice cream and light ice cream like over everything else, because those are the ones that you're gonna have bases with milk, and I feel like you have the most. They're just like the best settings overall, but those are the ones I focus on. So in terms of this video, like it's gonna be more focused on those two settings. Just wanted to mention that. And then for the swirl, I recently got this. I haven't even used it yet, so I don't really know too much about the actual like soft serve mechanic component of it, but I'm sure I'll be able to comment on it. All right, so we're talking about the base Ninja Creami now. A lot of these settings are also on the swirl, but all right. So you have ice cream. Ice cream is gonna be best for bases that use like whole milk, and then like sweetener, and so it would be like a whole milk sweetener, uh, not super fatty, but they do have some fat. They do have some sweetener. And it's compared to the next setting, light ice cream. It's more gentle. So I typically use this when I use like PB Fit, which would add a little bit of fat. Maybe if I use some nuts in my base, or maybe if I just want a thicker base because it is more gentle, so your ice cream will probably turn out thicker. The next is light ice cream, which it's just gonna be a more like harsh. It's a stronger version of ice cream, so it'll just spin for longer. It'll spin harder, so it might give you a less thick ice cream. It'll still be ice cream consistency. It'll just be less thick. But the reason you might want to use light ice cream, because it will destroy more of the ice crystals. So if you're using ice cream every single time with like non-fat milk, you might find that your ice cream has sort of an icy consistency. So to try to avoid that, I'd recommend using light ice cream in most cases. And it is the setting I probably use the most. Um, Next we have sorbet, which is this is the so out of all the settings for the base, I've only really used three, besides respin and mixin. But those aren't really settings. Um, and the third one is sorbet. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You freeze fruit. I'll get into like recipes, ingredients, amounts, all that later. But you freeze fruit, you get a sorbet. it's not going to be ice cream consistency, it's going to be sorbet consistency, but it's really nice. It's very pleasant. I've done it with mango, berries, cherry. It's very nice. Smoothie bowl. So this is gonna give you um like a softer texture. It's in I've used it I think once only, so I don't really know too much about it, but I'm pretty sure it's just more aggressive than light ice cream. Milkshake, you get this one I've never used before, but I've researched it, and apparently you mix ice cream. You can either use like store bought ice cream or ice cream you make in the machine, and then you mix it with some sort of milk, and it makes it into a milkshake. So that's interesting. And then there's gelato, which gelato is just gonna be for like more rich, like those sorts of ice creams. And then there's the two like other functions that are on the bottom, which is mixin and respin. So these are both like kind of like finishing modes that you want to put it on. So for for each pint of ice cream, you want to have like the initial mode, which is typically going to be light ice cream or ice cream, and then there's like the finishing modes of respin and mix-in, which I'll get into later. But typically after the first spin, it's not going to become like instantly ice cream consistency. So you want to either use mix-in or respin to get you there. So respin is like what's actually designed to get you there. And then mixin is about like I'd say like half to a third of the strength of respin. So like it's like a more gentle version of respin, but then mixin also doubles as well. I mean, its primary function is to like incorporate mix-ins, which I'll get to later in the video. So that's everything in the base Ninja Creami. So what does the swirl add? So this is considered like an upgrade to the base. So what does it actually change? So it has a couple settings that it removes and then a couple that it like changes and adds. So I'll talk about what's different from it. These are a couple that are in this that are also in this. So the first is creamy fit, which this is going to be just light ice cream, just more aggressive. So it's a pretty aggressive setting. It's made for like high protein, low fat, low sugar. I've seen like I obviously haven't used it because I haven't used this machine yet, but I've seen people online say it's better just use like ice cream. There's never like really an instance for you to use it, but I mean maybe I'll do future experimentation on that. And then there's frozen yogurt, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's made for bases with yogurt. It tries to like keep some of that like tangy or like that texture of like frozen yogurt. So that's probably also like to be used with the soft serve setting that I'll talk about later. And then there's frozen custard, which this is just gonna be ice cream, but for a lot more richer bases. So bases that use like heavy cream and whole milk, so like really rich bases. It's basically ice cream, but it spins for less. So and then there's fruit whip, which is just the same thing as sorbet, but it incorporates a bit more air. So it's good for like recipes like Dole Whip, for instance. You might want to use Dole Whip on a soft serve, so you run it through fruit whip first, so it incorporates a bit more air, so it's not like as dense of a final product. And then there's the actual soft serve setting or part of this machine, which is probably the main buying point. So what you do is you finish like your ice cream on one of like the settings that I mentioned already in here, and then there's another lid you place on top of it, put it in here, and it dispenses soft serve. I'll probably try to put like a video on screen of what that looks like. But yeah, so that's kind of like it's more like a novelty thing. It's not really necessary. It's not gonna change like the taste of the ice cream. It might be like a more fun experience. Maybe you can swirl some flavors, but yeah. So just a quick comment. Having not tried it, I'd probably say it's worth upgrading if you can afford the extra money. I don't think I make soft serve every time, but it's definitely a cool thing to have. It just gives you more options. So the final verdict is really the two main settings I'd recommend using are ice cream and light ice cream, and then respin and mix in as like those like finishing settings. But yeah, so that's how the machine works. Let's get on to the next section. All right, so now you know like what the different settings do, and so now I want to talk about what ingredients are going to be used in like basically every recipe. Um, yeah. So again, this is for mostly for the light ice cream and ice cream settings. There are other settings. I'm sure they're useful. I'm sure they're great, but I personally don't know too much about them. I will have at the end of this section a little like comment on sorbet and how that works. But for now, it's gonna be a focus on ice cream and light ice cream. Um, and I want to say I'm not gonna get into exact measurements. That will be in a later section. Just because I don't want to like throw so much information all at once. So go to the build your own recipe section if you want to get into how much you should be using of each ingredient. So at the base of every single ice cream in the ice cream recipe, there's milk. In my recipes, I always recommend Fairlife just because that's gonna give you like it's a filtered milk. They filter out the lactose and like some of the sugars, I think. So it's gonna be like a higher protein milk. So that's typically what I use in my recipes, but or what I recommend in my recipes. But typically, what I use is skim milk, which is effectively the same thing. They just don't filter out the lactose and maybe some of the sugars. It works fine, even though it's non-fat. You can't really tell that much, and at least in my opinion, from the texture. So every single recipe uses a milk. If you don't want to use a cow milk, I know some other good options are cashew and soy. I've People use almond milk, but I find that almond milk it gives you more of like an icy texture just because it is really low in protein. And so if you do use almond milk, what I'd recommend, or if you do want to use almond milk, because I get the appeal of it, it's also a lower calorie option, so that's always nice. I'd recommend going like 50-50 split with regular milk and almond milk, or almond milk and cashew milk. And then in terms of filtered milks, Fairlife is a great option. I personally don't use it just because like that can get more expensive, especially if you're having this a lot. While skim milk is typically like going to be more affordable. And then yeah, so there's like those dairy-free options in soy and cashew. Those are my two like alternative milk. Those are my biggest recommendations. And then obviously protein shakes work good, but that gets expensive very, very quick. But if you want like a really high protein thing of ice cream that protein shakes taste good on their own. So you can probably just put that in the pint, freeze it, and you have a high protein ice cream, but that will get expensive pretty quick. All right, so our first component is always going to be milk. Our second component is flavoring. So you want your thing to actually taste like something, obviously. So what do we have? So I'm gonna get into my favorite ingredients section later where I talk about like the actual ones. I just got some here just to show you like more or less what I'm talking about. So we have cocoa powder, if you want chocolate, PB Fit, regular peanut butter works, but I find that this is probably like one of my favorite ingredients to use in Ninja Creami, so I'd really recommend getting a powdered peanut butter. And Aldi's is a brand, and then this is from Costco, so there's like options. And then there's extracts. This is a bakery emulsion, which is effectively just an extract. Another extract. This one's almond. And then there's syrups. This is a brand, Jordan Skinny Mixes. Um, my two favorites are toasted marshmallow and salted caramel. They're both just really useful if you want to get like caramel, like that flavor in a recipe. I find that by themselves they're not too good, but when used with other flavors and like when they're used like as more of like a complementary flavor, I feel they do a very nice job. And then so the next ingredient is xanthan gum. This is basically I'm not basically it is in every recipe. It thickens the milk and it just helps it reach the texture of ice cream. It's there's alternatives. There's like guar gum, I think gum arabic, but xanthan gum I really recommend it because you can get like these huge servings for like really affordable prices. And so yeah, I have like a really big container right now. And then sweetener. So sweetener is probably like you probably have the most options here. Um, and it's also probably like the most important part because if your ice cream's not sweet, it's not gonna taste good at all. So yeah, options. Let's talk about it. So allulose is the main thing I use. You can tell this is at basically empty now. And then this is a brand that I found at Costco. It's allulose. It's flavored with monk fruit, so it's basically just gonna be a little bit sweeter than allulose. And there are a bunch of other sweeteners. Here I have sucralose. This works well as like a cost-effective option. But yeah, there's tons of options for sweeteners. It's really just about like research. I can do a video if you guys are interested in that. On different sweeteners, like their pros or cons. I can talk about prices and all that. But yeah, so you want to make sure you can get a good sweetener. I know some good ones are erythritol, monk fruit, stevia, sucralose. Obviously, normal sugar works. So yeah, that's another component. And then salt. If you're if you're if you have issues with salt intake, I would just leave it out. I've heard, I'm not like a food scientist or anything, but I've heard that it helps like think make things taste better and more sweet. So I use it in all my recipes. I recommend like I always put a fourth teaspoon, but I really just give it a dash of salt. I wouldn't worry about it too much if you really can't have salt. All right, so that's salt. So that's all the components that typically make up a base. And then we get to the fun part, which is mix-ins. So you can obviously do cereal, which is one of my favorite mix-ins. There's so many options. Right now I have Cocoa Puffs, I have Reese's Puffs, I have these, which are like, um, it's really good. I don't know what it is, but it's really good. Captain Crunch, Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles. There's a bunch of options for cereal. Cereal can also be used as more of like that flavoring option. If you like soak the milk in it, the milk will start to taste like your cereal. And there's other options like I used this instead of Oreos. It's effectively the same thing. It just doesn't have the cream. So there's also this. These are really good if you haven't tried them. It's like a fiber bar. But yeah, so there's plenty of options for mix-ins. I I normally recommend like not over relying on mix-ins for your flavor, just because that is like one of the not one of the strong points of the machine. Sometimes it can struggle like fully incorporating mix-ins, so you'll get like your top half of your pint will have a lot, and on the bottom half it'll kind of just be empty. So I wouldn't say to over rely on mix-ins for your flavor, but it's definitely a nice thing to have. All right, that's it. All right, I almost forgot to talk about sorbets, but they are really easy. You really only need some type of fruit, berries, mango, banana, whatever works well. Some sort of acidity. Typically, just use lemon juice. Pretty simple. A sweetener. Any sweetener will work for this. And then you probably will need water to thin it out. So how you go about this is just blending all the ingredients together until it becomes just like fully mixed, because you don't want to add like fruit straight into your pint because that can damage the blade. So you blend it first, you freeze it, and use the sorbet setting. And I'll talk about actual like amounts later in the video. Okay, welcome to the step-by-step guide. So I'm gonna try to bring you through the entire process of making Ninja Creami to hopefully make it easier for you. So before we actually even make the pint, I think it's important that you learn how to make your own flavors and like develop a flavor. So that was the first step that I thought of. Think of an idea for a flavor, and I came up with like four main ways you can do this. So the first is like probably the most obvious. Just look online for recipes like on my channel, on a bunch of other people's channels. There's going to be recipes online. The second one is ingredient, and then you go off build off that. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. So I recently got coconut extract. I recently like re-got these little chocolate chips, which are basically just Oreos. So I'm going to be making coconut cookies and cream ice cream. Yeah, so the second option is just getting an ingredient and thinking about what ice cream flavors can I make with that ingredient. Another one is looking at popular desserts. So recently I saw this person online making something called a banoffee pie, which it's like banana, caramel, cinnamon, I think a couple other things. So I put those ingredients in an ice cream and it tasted really good. And the final and personally my favorite way of finding new flavors is looking at popular ice cream brands and shops. So brands would be like Ben and Jerry's, Jenny's, like all those brands online. They have like amazing flavors, and they're really easy to copy most of the time. And then shops. So if you have like a shop near you, an ice cream shop near you that does cool flavors, I do have a lot of those, so I take inspiration from them a lot of the times. All right, so you have your flavor combination, and now you have to create your recipe. So in the build your own recipe section, I'll go into the details on this, but you basically just want to decide how much of everything are you going to be using, so you don't have to be doing it when you're actually making the pint. And then in addition to that, you want to like kind of, it's not super strict, but in your head, you want to divide your wet ingredients and your dry. And your dry doesn't necessarily mean anything that's just dry. It means more like powders or things that might clump up, because you want to separate those if you're going to be going with the method that I'm going to be going with now. So there, this is all the preparation we have to do, everything before we actually make the pint, and now we can actually make it. So as I said, I'm going to be making a coconut cookies and cream. The cookies is just going to be this, which is going to come in at the end, so you don't have to worry about this for now. But yeah, so we're just going to be making a typical coconut base basically, and then I'll see you when actually like I'm going to make the pint. So the first thing we have to do is our milk. Well, our wet. So I'll call it the wet, but if you're using things like bananas, nuts, berries, remember with berries, bananas, and apples, like that kind of stuff, you do want to blend it. But in my mind, that's all considered wet because it's stuff that's me going into it's not stuff that'll clump up, it's not a powder. Like cocoa powder, PB Fit, those are dry. So you can kind of tell like how to divide it. So I focus on the wet first. So I get my pint, turn on the scale, and then so I've already like mentally created a recipe. So I know how much of everything I'm gonna be using, which that was step 2. So yeah, so I'm just saying ideally you know like how much of everything you're using before, and you're not just like eyeballing it on the spot, just so you can get the same like result over time. So we got our milk done, and then the only other quote unquote wet ingredient, I'm not gonna be using anything like bananas, berries, nuts, whatnot, like syrups. The only wet ingredient is gonna be a coconut extract. In terms of like how much of extracts you use, it's again just trial and error. Really depends on the extract, but coconut, I find a teaspoon works well. And then I typically just give it like a little stir. Okay, I'm back again. I almost forgot to mention, there are other things you can use besides just doing it the way I'm doing it right now. So this is an immersion blender. This will make mixing a lot easier. The way I'm going to mix it manually just because I want to just show you how I'd go about doing that. But if you have an immersion blender, if you have an actual blender, I have one there, but I'm not going to show it because you probably know what a blender looks like. But if you have either of those, you just throw all the ingredients in. It's high speed enough where you don't really have to worry about anything clumping. Yeah, so if you have those, it's just about like throwing all the ingredients in. You don't have to worry about what I'm gonna do now. So yeah, so we have our wet, which is our milk and our coconut extract, and so that's ready. That part of the recipe is ready. And then I typically just get a little container, just a little glass, so we can mix our dry powders in. So this is a really simple coconut base. I'm just going to be using sweetener. I'm going to be using xanthan gum and then salt. So it's not super complicated, but I'd probably recommend starting with the sweetener just because that will help the most with like not having everything clump up. Okay, so we have our sweetener in the little container. Now we add our salt. Remember, it's just a dash. It's not like super strict. Enhances the flavors. If you want to leave it out, leave it out. I would just like kind of eyeball it. All right, should be good. And now we do the xanthan gum. So this is gonna be a 4th teaspoon, which I don't have my 4th teaspoon. I didn't come prepared. I'll go get it really quick so we can add our xanthan gum. All right, hopefully that's the last time I have to leave and come back. I think it will be. So we have our 4th teaspoon, and we're just gonna add it to the dry, because xanthan gum is one of those ingredients that if you don't really do this method where you mix all the dry first, it will clump up. Yeah. So you add it on top, and then you kind of just like give it a stir so it like mixes well with the allulose. Because if not, you'll see that on the top of your liquid, a bunch of like clumps of xanthan gum will start to form, which like obviously isn't ideal. Yeah, that should be fine. So I gave it a little stir, and then, all right. So we have all our ingredients ready. Now we just have to add the dry to the wet. So we can get rid of this scale. And now we have our milk, and our dry. So of course you can do this in a blender. You can use an immersion blender. You can use a milk frother. I've heard that that's not like good to use, but I mean I've used it in the past and it worked fine. So I'm sure that works well as well. But I'm just gonna be using a whisk because I'm sure like everybody has a whisk. It's one of those things. You can also just use a fork, a spoon. But yeah, if you're using these handheld things, you want to be more like aggressive with it to make sure that it actually incorporates well. So we add the dry to the wet, and then just stir. So in terms of how long you want to be stirring for, I'd say like I do like 30 seconds, but yeah. If you stop stirring and you don't see any clumps, it should be fully incorporated. But yeah, I don't know. So just do this until it's fully mixed, and I'll see you when I'm done. All right, so I finished mixing, and now remember, just always try your base before freezing it. I've obviously made this base a ton of times before, so I know it tastes good, but so I probably won't try it. No, maybe not. I will. Yeah. Coconut is one of those bases where it's really simple. You really just need the extract and the sweetener, and it tastes good. But yeah, so always taste your base, because once it's frozen, you can't adjust, and now you can. If it's not sweet enough, you can add more sweetener. If you're using the coconut flavors, too weak, you can add more extract. So yeah, that's perfect. All right, so we have our base fully ready. This is ready to freeze. Just always freeze with the lid on, and I'll meet you at the freezer. Okay, my fridge. I just want to give it like really quick comment. So you want these to always freeze upright. So ideally you have like a place like this where it can just like sit fully straight. All right, so that's it. You just gotta freeze it for 24 hours. So I'll see you in 24 hours. So it's been frozen for 24 hours. So now I'm gonna show you how to actually spin it into ice cream. So just a couple things you want to have before you start spinning. Obviously your lid. You want to have like your mix-ins ready to go, and then you want to ideally have like some sort of like butter knife. I'll explain why in a second, and then just some type of paper towel. So we have everything. It's been frozen for 24 hours. We check it and it's flat. I'll probably explain later in the video why you don't want to bump, but we checked it. It's good. And you can run it under hot water. For the longest time I did. I recommended it, but we're gonna do a step later in the process. It's gonna make it like so you don't really need to. If you want to run it under hot water for like 10-15 seconds, that's fine, but personally, I make so many where it's just if I have to do that every time, it's kind of a hassle. So I decided to just stop doing it. All right, so we get our thing, add our pint to our thing, and then hopefully this is all like, this part so far is pretty simple. All right, so we secure it to our machine, turn on, scoop. All right, so this is just a coconut base, so there's not a lot of fat in it. It's skim milk, and there's not really any other fat. So I wouldn't typically recommend using ice cream. So I'm probably gonna use light ice cream. Um, yeah. So I'm just gonna run it on light ice cream, and I'll see you when it's done. I'm not gonna record this because it's gonna be very, very loud. Yeah. So I'll see you when it's done running. Okay. So it just finished. And now let's see what it looks like. All right. So you can probably tell this is very close to what you want in terms of consistency. So if it was a bit more powdery, you'd probably want to mix. Well, we're gonna do a step now. But when you first do your first initial spin, you want to check the consistency. If it's very close to that ice cream consistency you want, you probably don't want to be using mix it or respin, because that is going to be a more aggressive setting. But if it's very close like this, well, this is pretty much already there, so I wouldn't recommend using any setting. Um, but if you find that it's like just almost at the ice cream setting, I recommend spinning it on mixin one more time. And if not, you can do respin if it's like still very crumbly. But for me, it's like pretty much already ice cream consistency. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna grab our butter knife and we're gonna run it down the edges of the pint. You don't want to run it into the edges because you can scrape some of the plastic, and you obviously don't want that. Yeah, so just run it along the sides. You're just trying to break up some of the ice that forms on the side that the blade can't reach. Yeah, so do that all around, and then we're gonna add our mix-ins, and then we're just gonna use the mixing setting because, all right. So I just wanted to make sure I clarify this. This is already ice cream consistency. So typically, if it was not, I would do this knife thing, and then I would put it into mix-in or respin, depending on how crumbly it is, until it reaches ice cream setting, and then I would add the mix-ins. But since this is already ice cream consistency, I'm just gonna skip that step and go straight into adding the mix-ins. So I'll do the knife thing and I'll be back. All right, just to clarify what I mean by the knife thing, I wasn't sure if I was clear or not. You just want to run it down. You see how on the sides it's kind of like there's like a line. You just want to run it down the sides because sometimes the ice won't like fully break on the sides. Yeah, so you're just trying to break that down so you don't have like ice on the side of your pints. Now we're gonna add our mix-ins. I've been talking a lot, so it's kind of defrosted. In terms of where I put the mix-ins, I try to put them on the sides just because the blade won't really like hit it as much. You put on the sides. Ideally you make like a hole with a spoon, but I didn't come prepared, so I'm just like throwing them down there. So you add all your mix-ins in, preferably on the side. It's fine if it's in the middle. Blade will probably hit them a little bit more. And let me quickly add it in because I've been talking so much. This thing is melting like crazy. Yeah, so now we're just gonna use the mixing setting and I'll see you when it's done. Okay, so I just finished spitting on mixing. So right now our ice cream is done. It's fully finished. Just see what it looks like. Wow, a little bit softer consistency. Did melt a bit. But yeah, you can kind of see what it looks like. This isn't really ideal texture. I have been talking a lot, so that's probably why. It's probably been out of the freezer for like 20 minutes now. But all right, so I'm gonna add this to the freezer just so it doesn't melt any further. And then I'll show you one last step you should do probably before you start eating your ice cream. Okay, so there's two steps you should probably do before you start eating your ice cream. One is eat this because this will melt quick. Yeah, so eat this, and then the other thing you should do is what you should do with your paper towel is that sometimes ice cream will get stuck on this little nozzle thing here. This happens more if you like overfill your pint. which it looks like I did today. Um, yeah. So you just want to kind of like rub it with a paper towel, this part right here, because ice cream will sometimes get stuck on it, and you're probably not gonna be able to get like all the ice cream off, but just try to get as much as possible. All right, so that's it. You have your ice cream ready. I'll meet you for the cleanup, just showing you really quick how to clean everything. All right, so I decided to do a little voiceover for this last part, just because the running water would make it kind of hard to talk. So the actual pint, it's pretty simple. You can just clean it. I'm not gonna really explain how to do that. It's pretty simple. The blade, you want to detach it, and all this I just clean with running water. I don't really use soap. You do want your water to be hot though. And then for this, is yeah, just giving a little rinse. You're gonna see in a second that I'm putting water down this hole. You see, I pointed it right there. You just want to do that for like 5 to 10 seconds. Remember with hot water. And then you're gonna take this little rubber thing off because sometimes ice cream can get stuck. You don't have to do this every time, but I did it this time just to show what it looks like. And yeah, so really just want to keep like a stream of hot water and then make sure you get those two places that I showed on the lid. But yeah, and then you can just pop it back on. That's it. I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so it's probably the most boring part of the video, cleanup and maintenance. I just want to give you like a couple like things that you should probably consider. I do it like once or twice a month. Um, so in terms of the actual lid, this is for the older. For the base, it's pretty much the same thing. You want to clean the lid. I'd probably soak it in water because there are internal components you probably can't get to just cleaning it in the dishwasher by hand. So yeah, so soak it in soapy water maybe once a month or so, and then in this actual part, um, there usually is some like sort of buildup. It's like ice cream from the machine. I clean it like once a month as well. You just don't want it sitting there too long. That's kind of disgusting. But yeah, that's why I said really short section. I just wanted to comment on it really quick just to make sure like you understand that these things will build up and it is kind of disgusting to leave them. But yeah, all right, that's it. So I decided it would be nice if I compiled a list of just some common issues and common problems that I see people complain about or mistakes that I see people make, just so you don't like have to fall into those issues. So the first is the ice cream is powdery or chalky. So this is normal. Part of the process of making the ice cream is it becomes a powder and then it's blended and pushed together and it's formed into an ice cream. So there's a number of reasons why this might happen. But typically it's just because the ice cream's not ready yet. I don't recommend adding more milk. I recommend just continuing to either spin on mix in or respin. Um, there definitely are some things that might cause this to become a reoccurring issue if you find that like it just doesn't disappear. So there's three things that I want you to think about is are you using regular milk? So if you're making your base completely out of almond milk, this is definitely an issue that probably will happen more to you. So maybe you want to use regular milk, soy, cashew. Um, or you might have a really cold freezer. So if your freezer freezes really hard, your base is going to be more solid than the machine is like designed for. Which to combat this, you might want to leave your pint out for a little bit before you actually want to use it. You can also run it under hot water. That will like help the sides get a little bit less frozen. And then you can just like keep on spinning until it becomes an ice cream because it should eventually, if you follow the two other steps, should eventually become an ice cream. So the second issue I see is their ice cream is icy. So this is simply because there's too much water in your base. This could be because you use like something like watermelon. Watermelon works. It works as a sorbet, but when used with milk, it's gonna give you like more of an icy texture. Or I've done a bunch of Ninja Creamies where you use soda, and it works well, but it definitely is icy, and that's just because you're adding milk, and the more milk you add, the more ice there's gonna be. So it's gonna still gonna be sort of like an ice cream texture, but there will be like some chunks of ice, which might not be pleasant. And it tastes bland. So the machine's not going to change the taste of your base. So you always want to be tasting the thing you freeze before you freeze it. And you ideally want it to be a little bit overly sweet and a little bit overly like intense in terms of the flavor. So when things get frozen and cold, the flavors dull, the sweetness dulls. So I'd recommend like going a little bit overboard, and that should be like a good place to aim for before you freeze it. And then another one is mix-ins disappearing. So this is probably like the most common thing I see people talk about. The blade does move like incredibly quick, so mixing it's more of a case by case basis, like on what mixins will work or not. So you might want to experiment with that, but there will be a section later in this video where I talk about my favorite mixins, so I can tell you what worked for me, so you can see maybe that'll work for you. In terms of like a tip I can give is probably putting your mix-ins towards the side of the pint instead of right in the middle will help them a little bit with not getting completely destroyed by the blade. And then the last is no motivation. I see a lot of people like buy the machine and they just like don't want to make pints, which like it's totally valid. Like it does take decent amount of effort to make pints, and there's nothing really you can do um to like kind of combat this like lack of motivation. One thing I do think you can do is meal prep them. So you can make like a batch of 4 pints at once in the blender. Just add all the ingredients, just multiply a recipe times 4, add it all into a blender, blend for like 30 seconds, and then divide it by 4 into your 4 pints, freeze. That probably takes what, like 5 minutes. You have 4 pints from that. So yeah. All right, let's move on to some common mistakes I see people make. Okay, some common mistakes I see people make. So the first mistake is spinning the ice cream way too much. So it's fine if you like more of that soft serve, like really like airy consistency. But personally, I like having ice cream in the Ninja Creami. I like a thicker texture, like more dense. That's just personal preference, but if you do like that, you probably don't want to be spinning it too much. So if after your first spin your ice cream looks really close to actual ice cream, I'd recommend not using the respin setting and just going with the mixin setting, because that is going to be like a less like intense, less strong setting. Yeah, so definitely start slow with the amount. As you make more and more ice creams, you'll start to get a sense of like when it needs the respin setting, when it needs the mixing setting. I definitely recommend like not overly spinning because the texture can become farther and farther away from ice cream very quick. The second mistake I see people make, which it's adding liquid in between spins. I don't really think you ever need to do this. Maybe if you make your like base with almond milk and it's like really icy and it's really struggling to like combine all the ingredients, maybe adding a splash of milk could be helpful. But personally, I've made like 50 or so pints now, where I've not had that issue and I've not had to add milk. So if you're having to add milk, it's um probably doing something wrong with the base. Um, but if it works for you, that's fine. It's just something I see that I personally have never had to do. And then not breaking the frozen bump. So at times your ice cream will freeze and the inside will freeze last, which will make a bump form. And you don't want to leave this bump because it could hurt the blade, and the blade could like hit it at an awkward angle. It's ideally it should be flat on the top after it's frozen. So a really easy fix is just getting a fork and just like hacking at it until it's broken. Yeah, so you don't want to leave that. Another mistake is relying too much on mix-ins. It's not really a mistake. It's just something I personally don't do. It's if you don't want your entire flavor to revolve around your mix-in. Let's say you have a cookie dough ice cream. You don't want to have just like a plain vanilla base and then just mix in cookie dough, because there will be points where you won't have a mix-in and the ice cream just tastes bad. So you want to have like a base that can stand good on its own, and then use like mix-ins as more of like a complementary thing. That's just my opinion. If you want to like rely on overly on mix-ins, it's totally fine. It's your machine. All right, next is not blending solid ingredients. So you don't want to put like just fruit straight up in the, like if you're making a sorbet, you don't want to just like put fruit straight up in the thing with like water and freeze it. Because the blade's not designed to like blend these things, so it could potentially damage the blade just putting in these things straight into the machine. That's another thing. And then not freezing for 24 hours. It might look frozen after like 15, 16 hours, but remember, it has the last thing that's going to freeze is the middle, and you can't really tell that just from looking at it. And it needs to be frozen all the way through. Like I'm just being honest here. Like the textural difference between freezing 16 hours to freezing 24 hours, there is a large difference. So I'd really recommend like freezing it at 24 hours, even if it does feel like a pain to have to wait like an entire day just to make ice cream. All right. Again, this section is focused on helping you build an ice cream or a light ice cream Ninja Creami recipe. It's all about ingredients, amounts, all that. The other settings will be different. Another thing to know is that these are for the base Ninja Creami. So if you have a deluxe, I'm pretty sure yours is 50% larger. So you can just scale every ingredient amount up by 50% and you should be good. All right, with that out the way, let's start building a recipe. I think I'll start with a coconut recipe. It's just a base recipe that tastes really nice by itself. There's not a lot of things you have to add to make it taste good. And I will be using a scale for the entire process. I just find it to be the most accurate way to get the same result every single time. But I understand that some people don't have scales, so I'll add conversions on the screen for those of you that don't. So at the base of pretty much every pint, we have milk. I recommend staying in the range of 12 to 15 ounces. Any lower in the consistency will probably be unlike ice cream, and then any higher, and then you're probably gonna pass the max fill line, and then that can probably damage the machine. For this coconut base, we're using an extract, which means that we can use a lot of milk. So there's not gonna be a lot besides the milk. The extract's not gonna really contribute much to the volume. So that means I'll be going with 15 ounces of milk. Alright, so that's the milk done. Now we move on to the flavoring. I recently got this coconut extract from McCormick. It's super good. The taste is really natural. It's practically identical to the coconut flavor you'd get like in an ice cream bar, coconut ice cream bar at the store. In terms of how much we're going to use, it's really dependent on each individual extract. They're not all at the same concentration. For the coconut extract, a teaspoon seems to work perfect. I'll leave on screen some like extracts and how much you should probably use of them, but I can talk about that more later in the video or in like a separate video if but it's really just about experimentation. Like some like peppermint you want to use a little bit, so you know. So that's flavoring done. You got the coconut and the milk now. So let's talk about so that's all the wet ingredients. So let's talk about the dry now. The dry, we're gonna start with the sweetener because this is probably like the most bulk that we're gonna add to the recipe. Um, and I use allulose. I've said that before, but I just wanted to like re- reiterate that. You typically for your sweetener, you typically want one that you can add like a decent amount of volume because it will help bind all the ingredients together. So that's why I do like allulose, but anything works here. You just want to use your allulose. Slightly less sweet than sugar, but I don't really mind. And I'll also try to show like rough conversion rates for different sweeteners on screen, just like by amount of sweetness. So you can adjust based on what you have. The allulose will be the only sort of sweetness in this, be the only source of sweetness in this recipe. So I want to use a decent amount. I'd say 35 grams works well. This is something that's super dependent on your personal preference. Like if you want a sweeter ice cream, go ahead and make more. Remember, you can always taste your base. You want it to be slightly sweeter, slightly more flavorful than you'd actually want in your ice cream. Um, so that's sweetener done, 35 grams. The next and dry ingredient is salt, which I basically always recommend a fourth teaspoon. Sorry, it's just a dash of salt. Never measure it. You don't really need to use it if you don't like using too much salt. It just enhances the flavor. And then the next ingredient you do have to use, and I always standardize this amount, it's xanthan gum. A fourth teaspoon is xanthan gum. Perfect amount. I don't really think you need to play with this number. Um, so that's the coconut base done. Just add the wet to the dry like I showed in the beginning, or not in the beginning, but previously in the video. Freeze, put in the Ninja Creami, boom, you have a coconut base. Yeah. All right, so that was pretty easy. Coconut base, it's really simple. Let's see how like we do like some more complex recipes. And remember, the main thing you want to remember is you don't want to overfill the pint. So if you're including stuff that's not milk, like if you want to include 50 grams of banana, you should probably use an ounce or maybe 2 ounces less of milk. Same goes for like syrups, fruit, nuts, whatever. And then using a lot of dry ingredients, in my experience, it doesn't really throw off the amount of wet. So if I'm using like 20 grams of PV Fit and 20 grams of allulose, I could probably still go with 15 ounces of milk and it probably wouldn't overflow. Um, but if you do want to add mix-ins, you probably want to leave a little bit of space. So maybe, 2 ounces less of milk. And I'd recommend reducing my milk to 13 or so when you use mix-ins. All right, so we're gonna make one more pint of ice cream. I wanted to make a more complicated one just to show you how to change things up. Because most of this is trial and error. I'm trying to give you like a rough guideline, but there will always be trial and error. You'll get better over time. So I'm gonna make a pistachio almond. This one was really, really good. I was surprised by this. I've never really had this like before, um, like from the store or anything. But my mom likes pistachio. She likes almonds, so I made it. Kind of just because it's what she wanted me to make. And I ended up really liking it. So I want to have pistachio and almond flavoring in the base. I don't want it to like be like mixed in. I want like the entire ice cream to taste like that. So for the almond flavoring, almond extract is a great option. It's one of the extracts I have that I love. Typically a half teaspoon to a teaspoon is gonna work. That's great. And for pistachios, I haven't really been able to find an extract or a syrup that actually tastes like pistachio. Most of them just kind of taste like garbage. So I'd recommend showing with a nut, which is what I'm gonna do in this case. And then I know I want to use like actual almonds as mix-in because I've been doing like research on um actual pistachio almond ice creams, and they typically have almonds as a mix-in, and I thought that would be a nice option because it's pretty hard, so it'll probably keep its shape well. And then so you want to keep that in mind. For milk, I'm probably gonna be using a lesser amount. I think I'll go with 13 ounces because I want to leave some space for the other stuff. So yeah, milk 13 ounces. Next, you have pistachios, and this is one of the instances you just like try over and over again. Um, but I find that 15 grams probably works well, especially if you soak it, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, so 15 grams of pistachio. I'm gonna chop it and I'll add it to the base. I'll probably soak it in the milk for 2 or so hours just so the milk can really absorb the pistachio flavor. And for the almond extract, I'll go anywhere between a half to a full teaspoon would probably work. But I want almond to be more of like a subtle flavor, especially since we're gonna be using it as a mix-in. So I'll probably go with a half teaspoon. And now we move on to the sweetener. I'm going to be using 25 grams. I still want this to be sweet, but for like nutty ice creams, I don't want it to be like overly sweet. It's not one of those ice creams where it relies like completely on the sweetness. You do want to have a little bit more of that nut flavor. Um, yeah, and then it's the same thing for the salt and the xanthan gum. A dash of salt, a fourth teaspoon of xanthan gum. Those really don't change ever. And then the almonds for the mix-in, I went with 10 grams. This You can go more. Obviously, the more you add, like the more caloric it's gonna be. So just adjust like accordingly. But I think 10 grams is good because you get a decent amount throughout the ice cream while still like not like having like crazy caloric load. So let's see how this recipe works out. You have 13 ounces of milk plus a half teaspoon extract, and then 15 grams of pistachio. So that puts us around 14 ounces for the base. That's basically perfect considering we still want room for almonds as a mix-in. These almonds will probably push us to like just about 15 ounces, which is like more or less the point where I recommend like stopping. You can probably push it to 16 ounces like in total volume for the whole recipe, but there you're trying to like pushing a point where your thing might over like fill. Sorry. And then one thing I wanted to know is that I usually let recipes sit like this for a while. These really like if you just add chopped in pistachios, it's probably not going to taste too much like pistachios. So if you let it soak in the fridge for like I'd say 2 to 3 hours, it makes a world of a difference. Your ice cream will actually taste like pistachio. And I also use green food coloring. I wanted to mention this just because you're obviously gonna see the finished product and you're gonna see it's green. That's not from the pistachios. That's green food coloring. Obviously not necessary. I just wanted to make it look green because it's a pistachio ice cream. And it would look a little bit odd if it's not green. All right, so hopefully this helped. It's not like really. You see how it's not like really strict building these recipes. It's more just about like over time you'll learn like what ratios work, what amounts work, how much you can fit, etc., etc. But And I know it might sound kind of complicated. You can start out just trying some of the recipes I made. There's a huge list. There's my favorite recipes portion, and there's a huge list of recipes that I'll be giving you on the Google Sheets document. And that way you don't really have to stress about measurements, the exact amounts. You can just follow what worked good for me. I recommend starting with my favorite pints, trying a couple of those, and then you can move on to the Google Sheets. And there's a bunch there, so you can see like if you really like a flavor, you can try that one out. And this will probably be the most helpful thing for you if you're having trouble determining how much of each ingredient you should be using. If you do this for a month, I guarantee you'll be able to create any recipe you want to. As long as you have like enough creativity, that's probably the hardest part. Like, how do I incorporate pistachio as a flavor? Um, yeah. So as long as you have the creativity, in a couple of months, I'm telling you, you'll be a pro. You'll be able to make like whatever flavor you want. You just got to think about how you can do it. All right. Hopefully that was helpful. Let's move on to the next section. All right. Welcome to the tips and tricks section of this video. These are really just things I couldn't really fit into any of the other sections, but I wanted to still tell you because I find that they're really useful. So the first is to try out new things. So whether this be new mix-ins, flavors, ingredients, a new recipe. I know if you find like one or two good recipes, you might just want to stick to those because like they're good. But it's always fun to like switch it up every once in a while, and you never know, you might find a new favorite. So the second is labeling your pints. So these are for the old pint. I always write the numbers on top, and then on my phone, I'll write down like what each number correlates to. So for instance, like 3, maybe this will be like a kitchen sink. Maybe this will be like a raspberry one. So that's just a useful way, like because a lot of the times, honestly, unless there's like something like raspberry or berries, the ice cream is just gonna look white. So when you freeze, you won't be able to tell the difference. And this way, you can freeze like multiple at a time. So normally, I have 2 in the freezer at all times, and then like 2 to 4 in the fridge, waiting to be in the freezer. So it's just an easy way to like organize and track them. And then kind of building off that is track the ice cream that you make. So obviously you can do this thing that I'm talking about, but then you also can track the ice creams that you want to make and the ice creams that you made in the past. So have like a list of ideas that you can make. Um, but this is something that I really love doing. And then you could track the ice creams that you've made, and you can give them like a little quick rating, like 1 star, 2 stars, just so you know, like I like this flavor. Because if you haven't had a flavor in a while, you might not really remember it. So this is a good way of just like keeping track of the flavors you've tried. So in the future, if you want to like revisit it, it's really easy. And also like of course keep the recipes somewhere. And then the last tip I have is to use mix-in instead of respin. I know I've kind of been like saying this, kind of like hinting at it throughout the entire video, but I kind of just wanted to like make it a point. So a lot of times you don't really need to use respin. Respin is like honestly, I don't think I've used respin in the last like 20 ice creams I've made, because mixing it's gonna do the same thing as respin, just a lot more gentle. So a lot of times, if after the first initial spin on light ice cream, if your ice cream already looks really close to that smooth ice cream consistency, sorry, you can just use mixin instead of respin. You could still use respin, but it might push it like more towards that like kind of frosty consistency. All right, so that's all the tips. It was pretty simple. I'll see you in the next section. All right, so let's talk ingredients. So I just wanted to share with you like what's personally worked for me, so you can kind of get some ideas. Maybe you can use some of them in your own recipes. If you have any ideas or any ingredients that I haven't mentioned, I think it would be nice if you could leave them in the description. Maybe it'll help somebody else out. Maybe I can see it and I can use it in my recipes. Alright, so let's get started. So the first is any Jello pudding mix. So this is really nice because it's kind of a complete package. You already have the salt, the xanthan gum, the sweetener, and the flavor all in one. And there's a ton of fun flavors. Some do taste like not so good. I think I had a pistachio one at one point. I don't remember liking it. But yeah, there's definitely some good flavors. I usually use vanilla pudding mix to get vanilla flavor because I'm really weird. I don't like vanilla extract. So I typically use vanilla pudding mix. So that's the first option. That's pretty like, it's a pretty easy thing because you just mix that with like 7 to 15 grams with some milk and you're good. That's your entire Ninja Creami. So the second is tea packets. So this is pretty easy. You just steep some tea in the milk. You obviously have to like heat it up beforehand. And then you do have to add like a decent amount of sweetener for it to actually taste good, but it's definitely a cool option. I think I've made 2 in the past. I think I've made a green tea and then like an English breakfast style Ninja Creami that used black tea. So that's definitely a fun thing to do. And then there's vanilla extract, which I already mentioned. I don't really like it, but I do get that a lot of people do like it. And it's kind of more just like a complementary flavor. It works in a lot of different Ninja Creamis. You can basically just add it to any recipe in smaller amounts and depending on the recipe, but it's really like versatile. Next is almond extract. So this one I recently got as well. And I was really pleasantly surprised by it. It's like, it's not really, it doesn't taste artificial or anything. I wouldn't describe it, no, it tastes like real almond. And you can use anywhere between a half teaspoon to a full teaspoon. A full teaspoon will give you like a really strong almond flavor, and then a half teaspoon will be more on that complementary style flavor. But yeah, so almond extract is definitely an option. The next is coconut extract, and this one I really, really love. I got the McCormick coconut extract. You put a teaspoon of it with milk and sweetener, and I'm telling you, it tastes like spectacular. Just, it tastes maybe not like as rich as coconut ice creams you get from the store, but in terms of like pure taste, it's 1-to-1. And then we have cookie butter bakery emulsion. So this is a Loran brand. And I don't know how to describe it really. I wouldn't say it's really like cookie butter, like that kind of Biscoff. I'd say it's more like premium cinnamon. It's like almost like pumpkin pie spice, but just a little bit more elevated. I really like it. You can just do that with like sweetener, and that's basically a Ninja Creami by itself. And next we have peppermint extract, and this you have to use like a tiny amount. It gets really, really artificial really quick. I have this little measuring tool at my house that it says a pinch on it, which is like typically like 2 to 3 drops of peppermint extract, and that's typically what I use. So be really careful with this, but it does give you like a nice refreshing, can be a little bit toothpastey if you use too much, but it's definitely nice. So that's all the extracts done. And again, I wanted to mention that this isn't every option that I've seen. This is just personally what I've used because I didn't want to comment on things that I haven't used before. Alright, so next we have lemon and lime juice. So you can buy these like in really big containers, which is nice. And then they kind of work in a ton of recipes because acidity typically complements like sweet things really well. And yeah, so you can make like key lime pie, you can make like different lemon desserts. So those are both really nice. And I also recommend using zest if you can get your hands on zest, but I like the juices because like they're more just something you can leave in your fridge. But using zest and juice is also a really good option. So next we have Jordan Skinny Mixes. So they have a bunch of flavors. I have not tried them all, and I'm talking about their syrups specifically. So my favorite is definitely toasted marshmallow, and my second favorite is caramel. They're both really nice. By themselves, I feel that they have like a slight artificial flavor, but then you use them with other ingredients and you can't really taste it anymore. So that's definitely a nice option. You can look at their website. Maybe I'll flash a couple on screen, some fun flavors, but that's definitely a cool way to get some like unique flavors in your Ninja Creami. The next is banana, and this is like one of those like really, really good ingredients. It works really nice because also I recommend, this is like quick caveat, I recommend ripe bananas. I've never used like non-ripe bananas, so I don't really know if that's good or not. I assume it still is, but ripe bananas is really nice because it gives you like this nice, like almost banana bread type of sweetness. It's amazing. It adds a nice sweetness, a nice flavor. It works with so many different recipes, so banana is definitely a hit. Typically what I do is I'll just like freeze half bananas, and then whenever I want to use one, I'll just microwave it for like 30 seconds. It gets really mushy and mix it with the milk. Yeah, so a half banana typically works well. Next we have PB Fit. So obviously it's not going to be as rich as peanut butter because it's lower in fat, but it definitely does replace that peanut butter flavor really well. PB Fit also kind of helps the texture a bit more because, I mean, PB Fit, when you mix it with water, it turns into peanut butter. So if you mix it with a lot of water, or in this case milk, it's going to slightly thicken the texture. So I find that when you use PB Fit, it does help the texture a little bit. And what I really like using PB Fit with is the Jordan skinny mixes that I was talking about earlier. You do like a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of that, and then maybe like 15 to 20 grams of PB Fit, and that alone with maybe a little bit extra sweetener is really nice. So next is protein powder. I've never used protein powder Ninja Creami, or not never. I think when I first started I used protein powder, but really I haven't found a protein powder that I actually like the taste of. So it's just a personal thing, but I've seen a bunch of people make Ninja Creamis just out of protein powder and like water and protein powder and like milk or whatever. So that's also an option if you have a good one. And then the next is cocoa powder. This is like the best option if you want like a chocolate flavor. 3 to 10 grams typically works best. And you could use Dutch processed cocoa powder. I'm pretty sure that's like going to be a little bit less bitter. I use like regular, like not Dutch processed, and sometimes it's a little bit bitter, but if you add like a decent amount of sweetener, it should be fine. And instant coffee. So if you want a coffee flavor, you can definitely go with like actual coffee or like an espresso or something like that. But I typically recommend using an instant coffee, especially if you can get one that you like the flavor of, because it doesn't really mess with the other ingredients. So when you incorporate like coffee, you're going to be incorporating more water into your recipe, which can make it freeze harder, which can make it kind of icy. And instant coffee, obviously, you don't fall into this issue because you can just mix instant coffee with the water, or with the milk, sorry. Yeah, so instant coffee is good. I typically recommend a teaspoon to 2, more or less like a teaspoon and a half. Honey and maple syrup are another one. So this is also like technically a sweetener, but you will be able to taste them in the final result, so I kind of wanted to add them here. Maple syrup is really, really good. Sugar-free maple syrup also works if you have that. And then honey's really nice if you want to get like a honey graham flavor for something like a s'mores or whatever. So those are both good options. And then also like any other liquid sweetener kind of fits into this section, like agave or whatever. And then any type of fruit, some work better than others. I mentioned banana, that's probably the best fruit you can get. There's also berries, mixed berries work really well. Blueberries, raspberries, like by themselves. Apples work decent. If you include apples, I like adding a little bit of apple cider vinegar, just because that is going to be a stronger taste. There's also stuff like pumpkin, mango, peach. Those also work. And I wouldn't fall into the trap of using too much fruit. If you want to make a fruit like based one, you can make a sorbet. But if you're trying to make an ice cream or light ice cream, I typically wouldn't go over like the 150 gram mark for fruit, because then you might start like, the texture might not be the best. And coconut flakes is the next one. This is what I used for the longest time instead of the coconut extract before I got the coconut extract. If I'm being honest, the coconut extract definitely is better, but this is also a viable option. You can kind of like seep the coconut flavor out of the flakes into the milk. And it's nice because you can just buy a big bag of coconut flakes, like leave it in your pantry, and it's kind of like a shelf-stable thing. So if you can't get your hands on coconut extract, I think coconut flakes are a good option. Next is cinnamon. Cinnamon, like you know what cinnamon tastes like. It kind of works in like anything. It's just going to be a nice flavor. And then also I wanted to include alongside cinnamon is pumpkin pie spice, which is really just like cinnamon plus. It just has a couple other like complementary things that like kind of boost the cinnamon flavor. But yeah, so cinnamon is definitely an option for a lot of Ninja Creamis that it'll fit in, and it works well. So next is coffee creamers. So any sugar-free coffee creamer really works well. It obviously adds a little bit of fat, which is nice because it gives you a richer consistency. Then they also have some really nice flavors as well that you probably couldn't get otherwise. So a couple that come to mind that I've tried are birthday cake. That one I mean, these are always going to be like slightly artificially tasting, but if you don't mind that, it's definitely a cool option to get some fun flavors. So I've tried birthday cake, butter beer. I've tried Italian sweet cream, which is like, honestly, it just tasted sweet. Yeah, there's definitely some good options out there. I typically I typically recommend like 1 to 5 tablespoons is a good amount. Obviously, don't go like overboard, because like that's gonna be really overpowering of a taste. Orange zest is the next one. So orange zest, I think I've only used once in a cannoli recipe, but it was amazing. That recipe was so good. If you have a chance, check that recipe out after you check out this video. It is spectacular. I don't know if it was purely because of the orange zest or if it was because some of the other ingredients like helped make it good as well, but orange zest is definitely a really nice option. And then in line with this, you can do like lemon and lime zest as well. So the next is drink mixes. To be fair, I've only tried one, which is like an orange drink mix, but I'm talking about like those sugar-free drink mixes that you can like buy like Aldi's or Walmart or whatever. And this is like a really cool option if you want to get like a fun flavor like orange. There's orange zest, orange juice, but if you can just use a drink mix, that makes it so much easier. And yeah, so if you find a drink mix that you have with water and you like the taste of that, the likelihood that you can add that with some xanthan gum, maybe a little bit extra sweetener with some milk for Ninja Creami, that's typically going to be a good option. And then next we have nuts. I'd find anywhere 20 to 25 on the high end and then 10 on the low end. Works for nuts. My favorite by far is pistachios. They work tremendously. Always with nuts, I recommend soaking them for a little bit. Yeah, so pistachios is my favorite. Also like pecans, walnuts, those are both nice. I think I haven't tried almonds because I typically just use almond extract. So yeah, so nuts are good, and then they're also good as a mix-in, which I don't know if I'll talk about later, but in case I don't, nuts also work as a mix-in just because they are really hard, so they do typically like keep their crunch really nicely. And then the last is soda. So soda, it's kind of iffy because you're kind of fighting the battle of adding too much soda and then the texture gets really bad, the consistency gets really icy. But then if you add too little soda, you might not taste the soda flavor enough, then it might not be good. So, but it's definitely a nice option. It's like a lower calorie option if you use diet soda. So you can check some of my recipes out for like rough guidelines on how much to use of each. I typically just recommend like a 50-50 split though. But yeah, that's another option. All right, so that's all my favorite ingredients done. I'll see you in the next section. Okay, let's talk about mixing. So that's probably the most fun part about the Ninja Creami, but it's also the easiest to mess up. There's definitely some, like, everyone kind of has that point where they try a mix-in and it doesn't really work. So I'll just tell you what worked for me. There's definitely some other options that I'm not going to mention here. I don't really have as much mix-ins as I probably should. But yeah, so I'll just tell you what's worked for me, and then maybe you can share some in the comments. That would be nice. But all right, so let's get started. So the first is sugar-free jams. Also, it doesn't have to be sugar-free. I don't know. I chatted that. But I really do like these sugar-free jams. I think they're called preserves from Great Value, so Walmart. But yeah, they're really nice. I've tried strawberry, blackberry, and I've tried like a Smucker's one that I forgot what the flavor was. But kind of what I describe them, they don't really mix in, like they don't really stay as a jam. So kind of what I describe what they do is they kind of paint the ice cream the flavor of the I guess I should be calling them preserves. So if you use like strawberry preserves, kind of more or less like half of your ice cream will be painted strawberry, so it'll have like a kind of like a slight strawberry flavor, which is really nice. So you can use them as that, and that's with the mix-in function. And then you could also just use them as a topping, which is also really nice. I've used them in a couple of recipes, so if you want to see what that looks like, just look at my account. I think there's like a lemon jam, there's an English breakfast, just from the top of my mind. Another one is homemade ganache. So I'll put a recipe on screen for this, but it's basically sugar-free maple syrup, cocoa powder, and PB Fit. I got this from a creator, I'm not sure who. I'll tag them on, like, I'll put like their thing on the screen, but I forgot. I need to look from where I found that from. But you mix all those ingredients, it makes like this like thick, almost like ganache like thing, you add it as a mix-in, and it kind of does the same thing as the jams where it paints part of your thing chocolate. And you can't really taste the PB fit, honestly. I think it's just for extra protein. So that's a good option if you want to get like kind of a swirl almost. So you can do like a vanilla chocolate swirl if you make like a vanilla base and then use this. And then obviously you can use it as a topping as well. And then sugar-free chocolate syrup. So there's a couple ways you can use this. I was experimenting with it. Honestly, I was kind of like disappointed with my experiments, but you can definitely use it in the same way as the ganache. It won't be as flavorful as the ganache. Like when it paints the ice cream chocolate, it's kind of like it's more of a faint chocolate flavor, but it is lower calorie, so like there is that as an option. And for the experimentation that I was talking about, what I was trying to do is I was trying to freeze them into these little square pieces, and I would use them as a mix-in, and the hope was that they would turn into kind of like fudge stripes. It worked, but not how I'd like it to really. So it painted maybe 30 to 40% of the ice cream chocolate, and then it left little chunks of the frozen chocolate syrup. By the way, I'm talking about the frozen chocolate syrup from Great Value. The Hershey's one is really bad. I mean, I tried it like a year ago, so maybe it's changed, but the last time I tried it was disgusting. I definitely don't recommend that one. The Great Value one is amazing though. I have that all the time. So yeah, so maybe try that yourself. Maybe you like it. It leaves little chunks of like frozen chocolate, which I don't know. I feel like maybe I need to do a little bit more experimentation on that. And then fiber bars and cakes. So all these sells 3 different flavors that I love getting, which are cinnamon coffee cake, lemon, and chocolate. These are delicious. I know they sell them at other places too. I think Walmart sells them as well. But they are so good. Do they work are they the perfect mix-in in terms of like, will they keep their like structure when used as a mix-in the best? No, but they taste so good that it makes up for it. And you get a little bit extra fiber, which is always nice. And there's Oreo thins. So you can of course use like regular Oreos, but I just put Oreo thins because that's probably the best like bang for your buck caloric wise. And you can also remove the filling. That's another thing that I've seen a lot of people do. Honestly, I don't use Oreos. I use instead, I'll probably put it on screen, these little like chocolate wafer things, but they're basically just Oreos with no cream. So it's really nice. You want like a cookies and cream kind of thing. And then another fun thing about Oreos is like they come out with like cool flavors all the time. So I think I've seen like they made like a cinnamon roll flavor recently. I think a long time ago I had like a Selena Gomez Oreo. I forgot what that even tasted like, but yeah, so Oreo is definitely fun as a mix-in, and it's kind of like perfect what you're looking for in a mix-in in terms of like it's hard, so it'll keep its structure even when used as a mix-in. So next is chocolate chips and coconut oil. So this one I think I saw it on TikTok, or maybe I saw it on YouTube. I'll definitely tag the original creator. I'll look for him. But yeah, so you mix a little bit of chocolate chips. It can be sugar-free or regular, and with coconut oil, the amounts that I typically use are 15 grams chocolate chips with 2 grams coconut oil. You melt it in the microwave, mix it together, and then it kind of makes like this like really rich, it's delicious like chocolate kind of sauce thing. And then you add it to your ice cream after the first mix, and then you use the mix-in setting. And I'll put on screen what it looks like. It's I forget what the word for it is, but it's like these little specks of chocolate all throughout your ice cream. That is a really nice thing. I love using that. I've used that in so many different recipes. Alright, so next we have cereal. So really any cereal works. Cereal also works as like kind of like a flavoring aspect, but I put it more here because it is more of a mix-in. Of course, like crunchier cereals are gonna work. My favorite personally is Cheerios, but that's just kind of because I love Cheerios. But some other good ones are like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Just think that kind of cereal, more of a crunchy one. But even ones like Fruity Pebbles that won't necessarily keep their structure as well. Since cereal is such like a flavorful thing, it's still really nice because even if they get kind of like destroyed, they're still gonna keep their flavor. And then obviously I said already, but you can do the thing where you soak it in the milk. so the milk kind of absorbs the flavor, which is also an option. And then pretzels. This is really nice if you're kind of doing, if you're trying to do like a sweet and salty kind of thing. So recently I did a kitchen sink, and I kid you not, this might be the best one. I'm not. I've been like, it's really hard to say like what's my favorite flavor, but this kitchen sink, it's in serious contention for that top spot because it was such a nice like mix of sweet and salty. But yeah, pretzels is also really good because they're hard, so they'll keep their structure. And if you get like a salted pretzel, it'll do like the sweet and salty kind of aspect. And if you want to do that, you can add a little bit of extra salt as a mix in, which is what I did for the kitchen sink, and I'm telling you, it worked really well. So the next is fruit. So you can either do freeze dried or frozen. I guess you can do fresh as well, but freeze dried and frozen. So freeze dried is or like, doesn't have to be freeze dried, but like, you know what I'm talking about, like kind of like not fresh fruit, but like dried. So that works really well because it's kind of hard, so it'll keep its like structure really well when it's dispersed. And then frozen fruit kind of makes it softens the texture of the ice cream considerably, so it's not really going to be ice cream consistency anymore. But it kind of works similar to the jam where it like paints the ice cream. So if you want to look for that, that's also an option. And then the last is cookies and crackers. So this is kind of just like a general category. This is what you want to be looking for. It's like a really crisp. So think like honey grahams, I think it's called. I think that's like the perfect mix in. It's flavorful, it's sweet, it's crispy. It's like, just think that like, so yeah. So cookies and crisps. That's like kind of like the general thing you should be looking for. It's kind of like an all, yeah, it's really just a general category. All right, so next we have my favorite pints. I'll see you then. All right, finally, my favorite recipes. If you don't want to listen to anything else in this video, you just want some recipes, I have them all here. I also have the Google Excel document in the description, but let me just get right into it. So the first is pumpkin pie. This is really nice. I wouldn't say it's like a one-to-one with pumpkin pie. It's like more like spiced pumpkin, but still, it's amazing. If I could have this every single day, well, I mean, I could technically, but I would have this every single day, like for dessert, every single day of my life. It's amazing. It's not really like anything else I can say about that. Next we have Chunky Monkey. This is a Ben and Jerry's flavor. It's by far my favorite flavor of ice cream. So it was like kind of like one of the first ones that I made when I really got into the Ninja Creami. So it's banana walnut base with like chocolate mixed in. It's you need to try that one. That one's really good as well. Next we have s'mores. So this uses a marshmallow syrup, which I love. It uses honey to kind of mimic that like graham cracker like honey aspect, and then it uses, I think, cocoa powder. Yeah, cocoa powder. So that's one. That one's also really good if you want like a s'mores. Next we have honey graham latte, which is inspired by another Ben and Jerry's flavor. I've never tried the Ben and Jerry's flavor, but I just saw it and I was like, oh, that looks really good. So it's caramel, honey, coffee, and cinnamon. You can kind of tell like what ingredients I really like. Um, but yeah, you can't go wrong with those ingredients. And I wanted to include a sorbet. Obviously, I don't like sorbets. I know it kind of sounded like I don't like sorbets by that. But it's just something I've like ventured into less. So I wanted to include one, which is a mango sorbet. Um, yeah, there's not much to say. It's like it's really nice. It's a mango sorbet, but there's not really much to comment on. Next we have key lime pie, which this one's really nice. Again, it's a kind of the same. It's in the same boat as a pumpkin pie. It's not going to give you that one-to-one key lime pie, but again, it's 80-90% of the way there, so I like it. Next we have cannoli. This one I was so impressed with. To be fair, I've never actually had a cannoli, so I could just be like completely butchering this flavor. But if this is what a cannoli tastes like, I love cannolis. It was my first time and my only time using orange zest, so I need to use that more in more recipes. But yeah, this is definitely like the one of the favorites of the favorites. And then another of my favorites is gingerbread. So I know this is kind of like a seasonal, kind of like Christmas flavor, but honestly, I just have it year round. It's so nice. You For the maple syrup, you can use regular maple syrup, which will probably taste a little bit better, but sugar-free works amazing as well. I really recommending like not leaving out the molasses or whatever, or including all the spices. It's spectacular. Next, we have peanut butter mallow. So this is peanut butter mallow, but this also works with any of the other syrups from Jordan Skinny Mixes. The marshmallow one's my favorite. So, but PB Fit with any of those syrups works tremendously. Definitely recommend. Pistachio almond. This was a recent one. I've never really personally been a fan of like nut flavored ice creams, but my mom loves pistachio. She loves almond. So she was like, "Oh, you should make this," and I was like, "Sure, I'll make it." And it's spectacular. That's if you love nuts, you're gonna love that one. Next we have coconut. I wanted to include this because it's not necessarily on par with the other ones. It kind of just lacks a complexity, but it is a really simple recipe and it still tastes spectacular. So I wanted to include that one. Um, Now we're getting into unreleased flavors. I don't think I've posted. Maybe I have. I don't know. These are like more recent flavors that I've had. So carrot cake. Um, this one I don't even know. I don't know if it tastes like carrot cake. I don't know what it tastes like. Honestly, carrot cake is like one of my favorite desserts of all time, so I'm really picky about that. It was definitely lacking in cream cheese flavor, but not to say it's bad in any way. This carrot cake is like probably one of my favorite Ninja Creamies of all time, and it looks amazing. I love how it turned out. I thought it wasn't gonna be orange enough, but it turned out beautiful. So yeah, definitely try this one if you like carrot cake. I think if you can add a little bit of cream cheese, I don't know how you would do that. Maybe as a mix in, it would like a cream cheese frosting that would take it to the next level. But yeah, it was really nice. Next we have kitchen sink. This one. It's the first time that I've done a sweet and salty, I think, and it was so good. It was yeah. That one. This might be my all time favorite. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Again, I did have it recently, so I'm sort of biased towards it. But if you like sweet and salty, definitely go with this one. Next, we have banana split. So this one's pretty complicated in terms of like ingredients, but it was good. It was like all the flavors. I think the banana and and the nut kind of take like more of a backseat for this one, but still, I feel like everything contributes even a little bit, and the banana really shines in this. But you have to use a ripe banana. And what I did for this one is I let it all soak in the fridge overnight, and I feel that maybe that was a game changer for this recipe because it kind of just lets all the flavors, the nut, the banana, all like kind of mend together. So that's really nice. Like banana split, obviously. Next we have pina colada. This one I wanted to include it because it's so simple. It just shows how amazing the coconut extract is, where it's literally just pineapple juice. So both those you can get from canned pineapple, sorry, and then coconut extract, sweetener, and milk, and it's pina colada. It's if I got that at like a resort or whatever, I would not think twice. Like it is like I mean, obviously it's not like as rich because I'm using non-fat milk, but if you make that with whole milk to replicate that same richness, I would not be able to tell the difference. I'm telling you right now. And just recently, I had this one Minnesota Fluff. It's made by this guy Leo's Lean Kitchen. Sorry. I love watching his videos. Shout out him. I'll put his channel on the screen. They're always really entertaining. He makes some fun stuff. I don't know why it's called Minnesota Fluff, but it's basically pistachio, pineapple, and then vanilla extract. I don't like vanilla extract, so I left that part out. I added the toasted marshmallow to kind of get you that fluff aspect. But yeah, so definitely try that one out. That one's really good. And I mean that's it. That's a wrap for this video. If you have time, I definitely recommend checking out the Google Excel sheet. It's gonna be an awesome resource for you to have. It's free. Like just check it out. There's no cost. You can just look at it. If you find like a flavor that you really like, maybe you can try that recipe out. And remember to always adjust like sweetener and all that because maybe like my preferences don't match yours specifically. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you learned like one new thing, then I'm really happy. This is my first time doing like a really long form video, so sorry if it was a bit iffy at points. But I really enjoyed editing this, filming this. The whole process was really enjoyable. I've had a blast throughout the entire time. So let me know if you like it in the comment section. Remember, any support is like means the world to me. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye.